Well, good morning. It's lovely to be here. Even in the situation, it's lovely to be here. I think in life, generally speaking, we're continually being faced with things that challenge us or things that delight us. The things that delight us, we don't want them to go away. We don't want them to end. It was lovely a couple of weeks ago or when I was on holiday in Anglesey with my son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren. And it was just totally delightful to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning with the kids. I don't usually get up at that time, if I'm totally honest. But to have them run in and tell me what they want for breakfast, and they're 2 and 3, and it was just a delight every day to do it, and it was a delight for Ian and Heather to stay in bed. But it was really great, and you think, oh, this is just a lovely time. And so we don't want things like that to end. But you know, when things come into our lives that challenge us, we're looking for a way out. And when COVID first hit in March last year, we were looking for a way out. We were thinking July, it'll all be over. And on the strength of that, I rebooked my 70th birthday celebration that should have been in April. And of course, July came and July went. And we all decided, well, September the kids will be back at school and everything will be fine. And then we thought, Christmas, it'll be fine. And then we were looking at Easter, and that came and went too. And now we're looking at the 19th of July, and we're still not certain about the 19th of July, and will it all end there? So we've been continually looking to get out of the situation that we've been in for these past 16 months. But what if God has been using COVID to speak to the world? What if? This has been an absolutely huge change to our lifestyle, our way of life. How many of us have seen this time as a time that God is allowing and using to change us, to teach us things that he couldn't teach us in the times we used to live in? R.T. Kendall says that everything that happens to us, whether good or bad, is allowed by God to bring us into a closer relationship with him. And James says in chapter 1, verse 2, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow." How many of us want our endurance to have a chance to grow? Well, I'll tell you, we're going to go through difficult times if that's what we want. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. God wants to develop in us faith and endurance. You know, the children of Israel had an absolutely huge change in their lives when they came out of slavery. And Moses was leading them from Egypt, from the slavery that they'd endured, I think, for around 400 years. He was bringing them out into the promised land. It was a huge change to their lives. And when they found out that it would take real faith and trust in the Lord, they wanted to go back to slavery in Egypt. Numbers 14 says this, then the then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. They cried all night because they knew they'd need faith and they'd need trust in the Lord. They cried all night. If only we had died in Egypt Or even here in the wilderness, they complained. Why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? They'd already assumed defeat. Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? And then they plotted among themselves, let's choose a new leader, and go back to Egypt. In other words, let's choose someone who thinks like we think and who will do what we feel is right. And God wanted to bring them into abundance, absolute abundance. But the situation was going to be challenging. It wasn't going to be handed on a plate. It was going to be a challenging time. And he wanted them to totally trust him because he was going to get them through. But they chose not to do that, and they preferred to go back to slavery. And so God wanted to wipe them out. And Moses pleaded for them. And then the Lord says this to Moses, okay, I will pardon them as you have requested. But as surely as I live, and as surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one of these people will ever enter the land. They have all seen my glorious presence and the miraculous signs I performed both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again, they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice. They will never even see the land I swore to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. But my servant Caleb has a different attitude. Some versions say, my servant Caleb has a different kind of spirit. A different kind of spirit within him. He has remained loyal to me, so I will bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will possess their full share of that land. They condemned themselves, the children of Israel, to a life of wandering in the wilderness. Why would God rebuild with a people who didn't trust him, who had never put their faith in him? They were going to die in the place where they were. You know, everything that God allows to cross our path is to bring us closer to him. Do you look at things like that? Do you know that God is in control in every situation, and that everything he allows to cross your path is to bring you closer to him? Can you see life lessons in situations that come your way, in the difficulties, in this time of COVID? For some, it's been a traumatic time. For some, it's been a time of suffering and death. For some, it's been easier. Some have learned to wait on the Lord, and some have learned to hear from him and to trust what he says. I asked 3 different people what COVID had meant for them, good or bad, and what they had learned from it, what God had been saying to them, if he had been saying anything. And we're going to listen just now to what they said.
Hi everyone, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Doddridge, Myra's daughter-in-law, and go to Manual Baptist. So Myra's just asked me a good and a bad of lockdown and anything I've learned. So the good was, I don't know about you, but when they announced lockdown was actually happening, for me personally, I was massively relieved because life had just got so busy, and Harvey was 2 and Isla was about to turn 1. And to be honest, it was quite hard work taking a 2-year-old and a nearly 1-year-old places. So part of me was relieved that we didn't have to go anywhere for a while. The other bit of me was really, really daunted, because also I didn't know how to entertain a 2-year-old and 1-year-old. In fact, sometimes I only survived the day by going out. So I was probably relieved and daunted in equal form. But I think a real plus for us has just been to have time together and just, yeah, have good quality time. And something I've learnt, I think, is probably related to that. I felt when everything started, I was just asking God a lot of questions about who I was and my identity, probably because of my stage in life where I'm stay-at-home mum, but just in terms of everything stopping and then not really knowing what I was contributing to everything. I guess it gave me time to think about it all, and I felt like God gave me a picture of a plant, and I'm trying to get better at looking at after my house plants, but it was this idea that, you know, we can keep watering the plants, and sometimes, particularly maybe in the winter, we don't see much growth, but we don't see what's happening to the roots and to the soil, and just that by the watering it keeps the soil soft, ready for the growth to happen, and for the roots to get the water that they need. And I felt like that God was a picture for me, that in that season where I couldn't really be going anywhere and doing things, or even living out more of a purpose and a calling, as it were, that it was just time that he wanted to keep refreshing me and teaching me things, and so that maybe outwardly nobody would benefit, but in terms of my relationship with him and my understanding of myself and who I am, that would deepen. And I felt like he said it wouldn't all be up straight away, but it maybe just takes time, like you water every day, don't you? Bit by bit, God would teach me things. And I would say, looking back, that that's definitely true. I felt like I learnt to rest better, and that God was teaching me that it wasn't about what people think, or that that's what I would be worried about, but moving to a place of living out of not what do people think, but out of that realisation that I am enough and that he's made me enough the way I am.
Right, when lockdown started, I was really apprehensive about catching COVID, as due to the illness I have, I don't have much immunity. So the thought of not being able to go out was quite daunting and depressing, as I wouldn't be able to see any of my friends. I'm very blessed though, as I live so close to my family, and they've been an absolute godsend. Macmillan ran the weekly chat sessions on a Wednesday morning on Zoom, and here we could catch up with our support group of friends, maybe do a quiz, maybe just chat about how the week has been, or if we had any problems, at least it's somebody to talk to, knowing we're all in the same situation. Macmillan also put us in touch with a local college who run wellbeing classes on crafts, on art, and lots of other different subjects as well. So I'm now excellent at making bath bombs and candles. My neighbours all formed a WhatsApp group offering help if anybody needed it. It could be just shopping, it could be hanging a picture, it could be anything at all. So we all got together every Thursday evening to clap for the NHS. And without all of this, I would never have got to know all my lovely neighbours. The road I live in is quite a long road, and the neighbours who live at the bottom of the road I've never even seen, never mind knowing them by name, but I do now, and they're all absolutely lovely. I spoke to the Lord about what I should be doing during lockdown, and he gave me projects to do. Chalk paint is brilliant at reviving old furniture, and that saved me a lot of money. I've also read a lot of books. That's been an absolute lifesaver. Just to be able to go out into the sunshine, sit on my swing and read a book has been absolutely lovely. So, what have I got out of lockdown? Well, I've made so many new friends, and I now realise the importance of them and how not to take them for granted. In fact, I've learned how not to take anything for granted. Life as we know it just hasn't been the same. I've also made things I didn't know I had the talent for. During art classes, I've made collage, I've made mixed media collage, I've done typography, you name it, I've had a go. More importantly, my health has been very up and down. And when I asked for help, and didn't receive it, I turned to the Lord and pleaded for him to help me sort it all out. He sent me to talk to the right people I wouldn't have thought of asking. He turned my insecurity and doubts into positivity, and I've ended up talking to exactly the people I needed to talk to by his direction. So I now have more friends, I have more support, and I have such a wonderful peace in my life. So lockdown for me actually wasn't so bad after all.
Morning. I've been asked to share about lockdown and what it was like for me, and the kinds of challenges of lockdown and what it was good for. And to me, it's probably easier for me to talk about the good of lockdown because, I mean, we got Mackey's deliveries. That was a game changer, wasn't it? You know? And being an only child and quite introvert and shy, I don't mind my own company. So it was okay for me. Lockdown wasn't bad. I mean, I got really sick at one point, but, you know, apart from that, I've kind of enjoyed lockdown because it's given me time and space to think and ponder stuff, you know. Just reflect on what we've been doing and what I've been doing as an individual. But the challenge was, how do we do church? You know, suddenly we're locked down, we can't go to church anymore, and yeah, there's this compulsion to still be church. We all know that the church isn't the building, so shutting our buildings shouldn't really matter, should it? And at first, I didn't want to go online because I felt it was a bit cheesy. I've seen some of the videos online, and not for me. So when Tom and Emma said, well, we need to do an online service, I wasn't keen. I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to put something out there that, you know, I was embarrassed about watching, never mind the whole world being able to see it. But they talked me into it, and to be honest, it was probably the best thing they've ever done. So thanks, Tom and Emma. Because I don't know, as a leader of a church, I've sat in loads of leaders' meetings over the years of being one. And inevitably at some point there'll be some discussion about what can we do. You know, if we had a blank page, how would we do church? How would we do it? How would we think? What would we do differently if we could start again? Well, you know what? Lockdown gave us that opportunity to start again. And we did things differently. We realised we were reaching a different audience than just Christians, and so we tried to make it more interactive. One week I'd be up a tree talking about Zacchaeus, the next week I'd be planting bulbs talking about resurrection, or and we started doing something natter so that the people could keep in touch and know about people who they hadn't seen. For me, that got a bit stale, so we've moved into live streaming now, which has energised us again, and it's, to be honest, it's been amazing. We don't do a kind of normal preach. We kind of discuss things sat on a couch. We have people on to talk about stuff rather than just having this monologue thing. And it's been brilliant. The uptake has been great. Hundreds of people are clicking on it every week. There's people coming to faith. There's people sensing God's presence. The community group in our area wanted to share it to over 6,000 of its members, and even me mates are watching. So the challenge now is, what do we do when we start getting our people back in the building? And to be honest, I'm not really sure. We'll have to just work that out, I suppose. But I can't abandon this online thing that we've done. Can't abandon that. It's too important now. And why would we just go back to doing what we used to do before? So for now, I'm trying to learn what the Apostle Paul tried to teach the Philippians, that he taught them to be content in every situation he finds himself in. That's my little reflection on lockdown up to now. Hope it's been helpful.
Interesting, isn't it? How God has spoken to people, even in difficult circumstances. And you know, Moses, leading the children of Israel, said this to the Lord in Exodus 33. If it's true that you look favorably on me, let me know your ways, so that I might understand you more fully and continue to enjoy your favor. And we need to look in every situation we're in that we can understand more fully God's ways, that we can see what he's trying to do in our lives, what he wants to show us through difficult situations. If I've done my maths correctly, it was 900 years later that another huge change came to Judah, the exile to Babylon that Aaron was talking about before. We're going to look for a few seconds at how Daniel handled the change to his life at this time, and what we can learn as we perhaps are coming toward the end of COVID restrictions and the opportunity, if you like, to rebuild. God will use people to rebuild. He will use us to rebuild when we stand content in him. And the context of the book of Daniel, of course, is that Jerusalem and Judah, despite countless warnings about their continued immorality and idolatry, knew no bounds, really. They carried on despite the warnings, and so comes God's punishment, and they are sent into exile. The destruction of the temple, all of that kind of thing came, and he had warned about it since the time of Moses. And from a human point of view, it looked like really the God of the Hebrews had been discredited because they were overcome by Nebuchadnezzar and taken into exile. The gods, if you like, of Assyria, where Israel went, and Babylon, where Judah went, appeared to be greater than the God of the Hebrews. And so God steps in to display his awesome power by a series of miracles that he does through his people, selected people who trusted him to show that he is ultimately in control. What a difference a situation, in a situation when we believe that God is in control, even if it's chaotic. When we believe that God is in control, we react differently. We stand with peace in our hearts. So in Daniel chapter 1, we read these verses. During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory. It was the Lord who gave Nebuchadnezzar victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. He said, select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men. He said, make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned to them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. He wasn't giving them rubbish. He was giving them food and wine from his own kitchens, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter royal service. And Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. And the chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. So in this passage, we learn several things about Daniel. We learn he was of royal or noble birth. We learn he was a captive. He couldn't please himself. Although it would seem that in the court of the king, he was open to enjoy all the benefits of being in the court of king, he was still a captive. He's given a new name, a pagan king's name. Well, I'll tell you in a minute what it means. And he's given a new home, a pagan king's palace. All of these things. In biblical times, a name was important. And Daniel's name meant God is my judge. His new name, Belteshazzar, meant Bel, protect his life. And Bel was the chief Babylonian god. And here he's given a name, and likewise his friends are given similar names. And what Ashpenaz, the court official, was trying to do was bring them in to the Babylonian culture and the Babylonian religion. He's introduced to this new culture. That's what it says he's going to be trained in. Every kind of language and literature of Babylon. They were being groomed, if you like, for a long stay. They couldn't look and say, oh, we'll be out of here in 6 months, we'll be back in our own land or whatever. They were being groomed for a long stay. In actual fact, it was 70 years. Imagine if COVID lasted 70 years with the kind of restrictions that we're enduring just now. And they were being groomed, if you like, for this long stay. There wasn't going to be an easy solution. And they were to start 3 years, of training. I don't know how you would have felt in this strange land with a strange culture when you stand firm and believe in the Lord. Would you really want to be involved in that? And lastly, he was given a new diet. As Jews, these men would have been, they were only young, by the way. Daniel was about 16 or 17 at this time. And they would have been used to the Jewish dietary laws. They would have eaten meat and all of that kind of thing, but prepared in the way that God had laid down. And here they were being given the best of food from the king's table. So it would have been a feast laid before them, and the best wines that they could possibly have. But Daniel had not argued about any of the other changes in his life. But here was something that came into conflict with the laws of his God. And he resolved not to defile himself. When I first ever read those words several years ago, it just blessed my heart. I never forgot that verse. Daniel resolved not to defile himself. It was an amazing thing, if you like, because he accepted the things he couldn't change. Remember that serenity prayer? Lord, give me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change. Courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. But here was something that came in conflict with the laws of his God, Jehovah. And this was something he wasn't going to defile himself with. And it matters how you live in exile. He could have turned around to the Lord and said, well, Lord, you've led us here, you've got us in this place, so we've just got to go with the flow that's going on here. But he didn't do that. He refused to defile himself with what the others were doing. You see, people are watching. People are watching us when we go through difficult situations. God is watching us. He is looking to see if we're relying on him. He's looking to see if we panic and worry, or if we say, Lord, I know this is under your control. He's looking to see if we'll trust him when we can't see the outcome. Daniel's circumstances might have changed dramatically, but his faith in God certainly hadn't. He refused the choice meat and wine. And I guess when he looked at the food, he thought, what is acceptable out of this? Well, the veggies are okay, and water's always fine. I don't know if you'd want to be on a diet of veggies and water. I love veggies, but I certainly wouldn't. But there you go. He saw what he could do and decided that he would go with that. And he didn't come at it from a point of view, we're not doing that. He was such a respectful man because people were watching him. And it tells us this. He asked the chief of staff, this is verse 8, for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. Isn't it lovely? When we make a decision to do what God has called us to do, he goes before us. And he makes a way where it just seems impossible at times. But the court official responded, I'm afraid, my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. I'm afraid of him. Basically, I'm afraid of him. He's volatile. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded. How extreme. He wouldn't say, you failed here, I'm sacking you and getting somebody else in. He would have me beheaded. Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. And Daniel said, at the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who were eating the king's food. Then make your decision in the light of what you see. And the attendant agreed. You can't argue with that, really, can you? It's quite amazing, but the trust that Daniel had in the Lord that they would look better. I mean, he didn't know at that point. He trusted at that point that God would make them look better. And at the end of 10 days, Daniel was not disappointed. Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier, better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. And so after that, the attendant allowed them to just have vegetables and water. But you know, it wasn't just that. Because when God is going to rebuild, he's going to rebuild with people who've put their faith and trust in him in the hard times. And so God goes beyond just making them look better. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meaning of visions and dreams. And so when the training period was over, and the men of then got to be brought before Nebuchadnezzar, here's the test. They've got to be brought before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them. And no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. When we trust in the Lord totally honors us. And the king could see what a difference in these men and among all of the others because of their total trust and obedience in the Lord. And in the coming days, God wants to show his power to the king, to the pagan nation, to the kingdom that Daniel was in, and to its gods. And he is going to use these men to do it. You know, COVID has made a deep impression on our nation and our world, both for good and for bad. There are so many stories of good that have come out of this, as well as bad. And, you know, we've heard testimonies. There's so much good that has come out. And Daniel and his friends could have blended into Babylonian culture. They could have been bitter against God. I mean, how many people, when they're in real difficult situations, get real bitter against God? If you knew how badly I was going to feel about this, why did you bring me into this? But Daniel resolved not to defile himself. I want to ask you today, have you resolved not to defile yourself when things don't go your way and you're in a place that you don't want to be? Have you resolved not to defile yourself? Have you looked at your attitude in that place? Have you resolved not to defile yourself when the culture all around you is becoming more alien than ever? Have you resolved not to defile yourself when the world wants you to do what it's doing? Have you resolved not to defile yourself? This is particularly hard for our young people. Pray for them. One translation of the passage in Romans, which says, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world," is, "Don't let the world squeeze you into its mold." Have you resolved not to defile yourself? Don't defile yourself when doubt is concerned. It's not just idolatry and all those things. Don't defile yourself with doubt. God is in control. Be convinced, utterly convinced, as a Christian who has first put your trust in him, that God is in control. Don't defile yourself with doubt. Don't defile yourself in despair. When the circumstances are hard, God makes all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. That's all things. That's the difficult things, probably more even than the good things. God makes all things work together for those who love him for good. Don't defile yourself with defeat. We are more than conquerors. More than conquerors. That's his word. Do we hold on to his word? We are more than conquerors through him who loves us. But, you know, we haven't just got to resolve not to defile ourselves, but to do it in such a way that impresses the world. To do it in such a way, we're not holier than thou. We need to do it in a way which impresses the world. Nebuchadnezzar and the other kings that Daniel served, he served 4 kings while there in Babylon. He was there, the lion's den situation, he was about 84 when that happened. And he lived to see some of the exiles start to return to Jerusalem. So it was a long time, and he impressed each one of those kings with the way he served the Lord. God was impressed with Daniel because he had first seen how much Daniel trusted in him and knew that he was in control. And those kings were impressed by God because first they'd been impressed by the one who served God. Nebuchadnezzar realized that there was a God in heaven. Daniel told him there is a God in heaven. You see, their lives were going to be a testimony to the power and the faithfulness of God, and so must yours and mine. So must yours and mine in every situation. If God is going to rebuild, he is going to rebuild with the people who were faithful in exile. He's going to rebuild with the people who stood on his word and knew that he was in control. How could he rebuild with the children of Israel who didn't trust him and who wanted to go back into slavery? The Lord said, no, you're going to die here. You'll die here and it'll be your children that go on. I want people who'll trust me. So if we're going to rebuild, We need to be those that know in every situation God is in control. In every situation. And we need to trust him in that, in our hearts. We need to trust that in every situation we can learn from him. And then he will show us things. The lovely thing about Daniel and his friends was they saw things from God that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. Unusual aptitude for learning. They saw things that we would perhaps miss. Daniel was able to interpret dreams and visions that he couldn't do before because God had trusted in him, because Daniel trusted in God. And if we're going to be the ones that are going to move things on and rebuild, we're going to need to be the ones that have understood that God is in control. And we have trusted him. And we do trust him. And our lives have spoken to that fact. People are looking at us. Are they saying that you and I have resolved not to defile ourselves in the situations that are wrong? Are we going to be those people that impress the world? And because we've impressed them, they will be impressed by God. God is looking for people to be that he can rebuild with, that were faithful in exile. It matters how you live in difficult times. It matters how you live in exile. Amen.